Thank you, Sue. Greatly appreciate that. I'm going to start by saying that this teaching is inspired by an article I read in the Jerusalem Post. Um, and you guys, I'm sure, are pretty well aware of what's going on in Israel and the war between Israel and Hamas. And a writer named Stuart Weiss wrote this: "We want to believe that life is not haphazard or random, and that God is watching over us, guarding us. We want to believe that God is indeed an all-powerful, good God who rewards moral behavior and punishes the wicked. Can we somehow reconcile these beliefs with the terrible onslaught on our nation by a thoroughly evil menace, one that daily robs us of heroic angels in green?" That's the soldiers who offer their beautiful bodies in our defense. Let me begin by declaring that I do not have the answer to these questions. In truth, no mortal does. And that's problematic to me because we do have answers to these questions. We don't have to sit around and say, gosh, if God is so good and God is in control, why are these things happening? And it was so interesting, to watch the contest, if you will, back and forth in the first song that was played, where the statement was repeated that, about God, that he was in control. But then, which is not true, but then the follow-up is, your love surrounds me, you are my anchor when my sails are torn. And God does have to be that. God does surround us, and our sails do get torn. And what we have is a firm hope in the future, because God is a God who keeps his promises. So what I'd like to do now is go over some of the things that explain why there are so many bad things that happen in a good world. And I want to talk about, first of all, well, the first thing I'm going to say is there's a boatload of reasons. One of the reasons we can't figure all this out is because there are so many competing reasons for why evil occurs. There's so many competing reasons, and many of them work together. They work in concert, so that what's happening around us can be really bad stuff. The first is that God is in control only in the sense that he will step in and manage the final outcome. But God is not in control of what happens on earth right now. Now, we should all know this instinctively because we all sin. So we either believe that God forces us to sin, which some Christians do. Some Christians believe that God actually forces us to sin. Or we believe that God has given us free will and we make our own decision to sin or to not sin. And that's true of all people, and that's true of the devil and his demons. So what happened that the Bible, and we'll get into this, the Bible actually says that the devil has control over the earth for the most part. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. So this is where we start. And this, by the way, is partially where we see the love of God, that God is so loving and so caring and so giving. And so here God makes humankind and he makes the heavens and earth. Now, he could have said, look, all you angels, look at all these slaves I've created. They're going to do exactly what I want. But he doesn't do that. Instead, I'll bet you even the angels were surprised when God, to his ruling council, verse 26, and God has a ruling council of spirits by which he, directs things that happen in the universe. Verse 26, and God said, let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. There's a lot to that, including freedom of will. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So verse 27, God created humankind in his own image. Verse 28, and God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that creeps. So in an amazing act of largesse and love, God gave the control of the earth to human beings, and we were supposed to steward it. Of course, I think you guys know the story of the fall, that Adam and Eve sinned. They had a choice to follow God or the devil. In Genesis chapter 3, they decided to follow the devil. And in doing that, they handed over the authority over the earth to the devil. Let's go to Luke chapter 4, verse 6. And this is interesting because in Luke chapter 4, verse 1, Jesus, full of Holy Spirit, was led around in the desert. This would be what we call the Judean wilderness in southeast Israel proper, for 40 days, being tempted of the devil. Verse 3, the devil came and said to him, and he's going to make various statements. And remember now, the devil is trying, first of all, he's trying a combination of things here. He's going to try to trick Jesus into sinning, but he would rather that Jesus Christ become a follower of his. And so he plays his trump card in verse 4. I'm sorry, in verse 6. And the devil said to him, to you. Well, let's go back to verse 5. And he led him up. The devil led Jesus up, showed him all the kingdoms of the inhabited world in a moment of time. And the Greek here uses a word oikumene for the inhabited world, not cosmos for the world, but the inhabited world. This is control over people. He showed him all the inhabited world in a moment of time. And the devil said to Jesus, to you I will give all this authority and their glory. Wait a minute. So the devil has authority over the inhabited world of people? Yeah, he does. And if all we have to do is just stop, get quiet for a second, and look at the world around us. When Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden, God said things were very good. As soon as the devil took over, now you have all the stuff that we put up with on the earth. We have famines. We have evil leaders. We have murderers. We have rapists. There's just, oh my gosh, the whole world is full of evil. And why is that? Because of this. Luke 4:6. To you I will give all this authority and their glory. And the word glory here in the Greek also has the overtones of power, or, where you're using power or might, for it has been handed over to me. Now, God didn't give it to him. God sure as the world didn't give the devil control over people. So who did? Well, God gave it to Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve handed it over to the devil. And then the devil makes this statement, and I can give it to anyone I want to. He's playing his trump card here. He goes to Jesus Christ and he says, look, you would have authority over all the people in the world, and you would have all their glory if you will become a follower of mine. And of course, we know Jesus didn't do that. In 1 John 5:19, let's take a quick look at 1 John 5:19. I should say, by the way, if you're reading a King James Version, 1 John 5:19 is not well translated. We have learned a boatload about the Greek language in the 400 years since the King James was written. And one of the things we've learned is about the proper way to translate or understand verses like 1 John 5:19. So we have it in the REV as, we know that we're of God, and the whole world lies under the control of the wicked one. The King James reads, the whole world lies in wickedness. That would be true, but it's not what the verse is saying. The whole world is under the control of the wicked one. Now, we put the words the control of in italics in the REV. If you read the NIV, for example, they don't even bother, well, they don't have italics, so they don't even put it in italics. But under the wicked one means, and you know this, if you're a boss and you have someone under you, you're controlling them. You have influence in what's going on. So the words are properly supplied. They just aren't in the text. Well, I hear people talk about the God is in control. I defy you to get a concordance and use a search function and find any place where the Bible says that God is in control of the world now. But I can look at the Bible and see who is in control, the devil. And then I can look around and say, what's the evidence out here? Who's in control? And the evidence is that the Bible is correct, that the devil's in control. If we look at Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14, Hebrews 2:14 is talking about the work of Christ, what Christ accomplished. Verse 14, now since the children, that's you and me, we become children of God, participate fully in flesh and blood, and we do. We're flesh, we're blood. In a similar way, he also himself, talking about Jesus Christ, shared the same, so that through death, he could make ineffective the one who holds the power of death, that is the devil. And how did Jesus Christ make the devil ineffective? Well, this is really fabulously ironic that it took the death of Christ to make the one who holds the power of death ineffective. And why is the devil's death blow ineffective? Because there's a day when Christ is going to shout from heaven and all the dead people are going to get up and they're not going to be dead anymore. So by Christ's work, he made the devil's work ineffective. But this verse says, wait a minute, the devil holds the power of death. And he really does. There's so many different ways the devil holds the power of death. He motivates people to kill other people. He motivates people to do things in the environment that produces death, deadly water, deadly air. He can actually, there's a demon of death that in some cases can enter a person and actually cause their death. He can do things through greedy people, like put all kinds of plastic in the water that we now know is harmful. He can manipulate disease organisms so that, when I study Greek and Roman history, there were really only a few known venereal diseases at the time of the Roman Empire. They knew about gonorrhea, they knew about syphilis. Now there's over 50 venereal diseases. Where did they come from? The devil God didn't make them. The devil's constantly working in the background to create things that make people's lives miserable and end in death. Cancer cells is a great example. So who holds the power of death? The devil. And so why is there so much death going on? Because of the devil and his people. Let's look at John chapter 14, verse 30. In John chapter 14, verse 30, Jesus Christ is talking to his apostles, and he says, I will no longer speak much with you. By the way, John 14 is in the Last Supper. So John 13, 14, 15, 16 are occurring in the Last Supper. So this is the Last Supper, and Christ is talking to the apostles. He said, I will no longer speak much with you. No kidding, because he's going to be arrested that night, and he's not going to get to talk to him much. And he says, for the ruler of this world is coming, but he has no power over me. Jesus Christ gave his life up. The devil didn't kill Christ. He voluntarily gave his life up. But Christ said, the ruler of the world is coming. Wait a minute. If the ruler of the world is God, God's not coming. The ruler of the world is the devil. And furthermore, in the Gospel of John, the devil is called the ruler of the world 3 times. Here in John chapter 14, and John 12:31, and John 16:11. So 3 times in John alone, the Bible says the devil is the ruler of the world. We're asking, why do bad things happen on earth? What is going on that the earth is just such a mess? And one of them is the devil is the ruler of the world. Now a problem. Does God have the power to fix it? He does have the power to fix it, but then he wouldn't be righteous. God has to follow rules and regulations just like you and I do. There is a standard of righteousness that God has to follow. And God can't just look down on earth and say, I don't like what's going on down there, and I'm going to straighten it all out. And all of a sudden, everything becomes straight. God has to be fair and respect the rules with which he has created the heavens and the earth. Now, The other thing that it works in tandem with this is God is love. And you guys, I'm sure all know 1 John 4:8, that says God is love. I don't think we need to go to 1 John and see that God is love to know that God is love. So because he's righteous and because he's love, he can't just step in and take back the world he gave to Adam. He just can't do it. And furthermore, he can't force people to do his will. And actually, the fact that God is love and he's righteous is why God's not in control now, because he can't step back and take over the control that he gave to Adam. But when we're thinking about love, it's important that we think properly about love, because love is not micromanaging. God takes, for example, when you have children, you use age appropriate directives. Like, for example, when a child is little, let's say they're 5 and that they're in the dinner table and they don't want to eat their broccoli, as a parent, you can say you have at least take a bite of broccoli, or however you work it out with your kids. But love doesn't micromanage. And that's actually a really good thing, because I think about the fact that, like last night, I was watching the late football game and I got snacky, so I had some chocolate covered almonds. Now, are they fabulous to eat? No, they taste great, but they're not the best thing. Well, I can see if I pop an almond into my mouth, but as it lands in my mouth, I go, that's raw broccoli. Well, raw broccoli would be much better than a chocolate covered almond. But I'm very glad that God didn't force me to have broccoli, because I'm doing something that's not the exact best for my body, if that makes any sense. So God, he wants us to, he respects our free will and free will decisions. That can be problematic, because one of the reasons that there's evil in the world is we refuse to do what God says. So let's go to Genesis, and we'll go to Genesis chapter 9. And in Genesis chapter 9, God tells people, this, by the way, is continued further in the law of Moses, when God says to set up judges and he ascribes certain punishments for certain crimes and that kind of thing. But in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, and remember now, the world's going to start over. Noah, in Genesis 9, Noah is just climbing off the boat with his children. And so God's instructing them right from the very beginning, okay, this is the way things are going to be, because God had just flooded the whole world and killed everyone but these 8 people, because the world was going downhill. The Messiah's line was going to be destroyed. That would mean there would never be a resurrection. God stepped in and caused the flood. And now he's going to start over, and he's going to tell humankind, I'm not going to do that anymore. He specifically says, I will never flood the earth again like I just saw. Instead, here's what he does. In verse 6, he says, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man his blood is to be shed. For God made man in his own image. Now, he's going to develop this much further in the Mosaic law. But the point is, as soon as Noah stepped off the ark, God said, well, I'm not doing this kind of thing again. I'm giving it to you. You are going to have to rule each other. You're going to have to establish the laws. You're going to have to maintain the laws. And basically, we live in a society that refuses to put criminals to death. People who are murderers, kidnappers, rapists, the Bible says those people should be put to death. It'd be nice if you didn't have to put them to death and there was just some kind of magic pill you could give them to make them be nice. But that doesn't work. And so God says, look, I love all of humankind, and these people over here, this little segment of society, is ruining it for everyone else. So I'm telling you, I'm not getting rid of them anymore. I'm going to let you get rid of them. So you decide to make the rules. You decide to enforce the rules, and we don't. And so there are rapists everywhere. There's kidnappers everywhere. Gosh, people are just afraid. I mean, you go to place, big store like a Walmart or some of those other big stores, and your kid disappears for 3 minutes and you're in this giant panic. And why is that? Because kidnapping is a very real thing. You guys may have just read the story where there was a babysitting service in one of the malls, one of the big malls in the country. I wish I could remember the state. And people are handing their 3-year-old, the single moms who are shopping are handing their 3-year-old boys, 4-year-old boys to this babysitting service to take them to the bathroom and bring them back. They get them to the bathroom and they rape them. Can you imagine raping a 3-year-old? My gosh. And this is, you hand over your child just to have an escort take it to the bathroom and back. And in the process, it gets raped. See, God would say that person needs to be put to death. And I'll take it one step further. Let's go to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 8. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 11, it says, because the sentence against an evil act is not executed speedily, therefore the heart of the sons of men, which is people, is fully set in them to do evil. So what does the Bible say? It says if you really, really want to stop crime, then you have to execute the sentence quickly. And you guys have probably heard the legal arguments that the death penalty doesn't work, it's not effective, but usually the time period between somebody gets a death penalty sentence and the time that it's executed is more than a decade. By then, everybody's kind of forgotten it and moved on. If you gave the guy a month to contact his pastor, contact his friends and neighbors, write some goodbye cards, and executed him, all of a sudden, wow, the death penalty is really effective against stopping capital crimes. See, if it's our fault, we don't obey God, and then we want God, my sister was raped, and I don't know what to do, and why didn't you step in and solve the problem? God's told us how to solve the problem. We have to step in and do it. So one of the reasons that there are bad things happening to good people is that we as humans refuse to step in and act in God's behalf. And I want to correct an erroneous belief. And interestingly enough, I just ran into this in December, and that is the argument that, like, for example, God's going to take the wicked and throw them in the lake of fire where they're going to be annihilated. We've got an appendix on that in the REV, and people say, well, a loving God wouldn't annihilate people in the lake of fire. That's one of the main arguments against God not destroying, annihilating the wicked in the lake of fire. A loving God wouldn't do that. Well, actually, a loving God does do that. And how does that work? Well, let's talk about a loving parent. A loving parent tells, say, a 14-year-old girl, okay, you can be out with your girlfriends tonight, but we want you home by 10 o'clock. And if you're not home by 10 o'clock, we're going to take away your cell phone for a week. Okay, so the girl's out there messing around, finally comes wandering in the door at 12:30. What are the parents going to do? Well, they should take away the cell phone. Love is not the removal of consequences. Love is telling someone what the consequences are, and then allowing them to make the choice. We do this all the time as adults. I know the concept. I'm trying to lose weight right now. In fact, you can be proud of me. I've lost like 7 pounds in the last 3 weeks. Yay. It's been pretty draconian. But eating those chocolate almonds last night didn't help. Now, did I know that? Yes, but I did it anyway. But at least I knew the consequence. I knew when I got up and weighed myself this morning, I wouldn't weigh less than I did yesterday. And sure enough, that was a prophecy that came true. But in any case, love is to tell somebody what to do and the consequences if they don't do it. That's love. Gosh, and are there lots of examples of that? Oh my gosh, yeah, there's a boatload of them. Let's look at Deuteronomy 30:19. Deuteronomy chapter 30. Get there myself here. Deuteronomy 30. We've been there before recently. Verse 19. God speaking, and God, by Deuteronomy, God had given the Mosaic law. These are the things you're supposed to do. These are the things you aren't supposed to do. Deuteronomy chapter 28 is full of curses. If you will not obey me and follow my ways, you'll be cursed in the field. You'll be cursed in the mountain, blah, blah, blah. Again, God lays out what to do and the consequences if you don't do it. So in verse 19 of Deuteronomy 30, today I call heaven and earth to be witnesses against you, that I've set before you life and death. God says, look, I've set before you the life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore, choose life. Choose life. Whose responsibility is it to choose life? It's ours. God gives it to us. Let's look at Ezekiel chapter 33:11. I love this verse because it reveals the heart of God. Because God created people to be around and to fellowship with them. He didn't create people just to destroy them. But by the time of Ezekiel, people were, the Israel was already gone. By the time of Ezekiel, Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians in the 700s, specifically 722 or 723 BC. So by the time you get to Ezekiel, in the late 600s, they'd already seen the consequence of disobeying God meant destruction. So Ezekiel 33 is talking to these people that have rejected God. They've defied God. In verse 8, when I talk to the wicked, that kind of stuff. But let's go to verse 11. And God speaking to Ezekiel, Ezekiel, say to them, as I live, says Lord Yahweh, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked. I love that. God doesn't want wicked people to die. God doesn't get all excited when evil people are put to death. He doesn't want that. That's not why he created people. He created people to love him and that they would love him. But he gave them free will, and now they have to make the choice. And so in verse 11, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but desire that the wicked turn from his way and live. Turn from your evil ways. For why will you die, O house of Israel? But you know what? They didn't. They completely ignored Ezekiel. You guys know the history. They completely ignored Ezekiel and his reproof, and they were killed by the Babylonians. It was, ridiculous. And God's way of getting rid of evil, by the way, is basically brilliant, because he doesn't step in and just surprise them with the punishment. He tells them what'll happen. I mean, how many verses? Gosh, the most famous verse in the world, John 3:16. That God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that anyone who believed in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. And those are the two choices. You can live or you can die. Those are the two choices. And so what do we see? We see what God does. And Michael Card has a great song about this. And there's a line in it that says, something very close to, he only speaks the sentence that they have brought upon themselves. You see, to choose life, you've got to be humble enough to realize you're not the Lord, that God's the Lord, and God set up his son, Jesus Christ, as the de facto ruler. And so you make yourself subservient to Christ and you confess him as Lord. Well, what happens is wicked, arrogant, prideful people, they won't do that. They won't make Christ Lord. And so by their own decisions, they choose death, and God, honoring their free will, because love is, you tell somebody what the situation is, you tell them what the consequences of disobedience are, and you allow them to make the choice. You don't micromanage their life. You don't force them to do things that they don't want to do. If they don't want to serve God, they don't want to serve God. That's love. And God, our God, is a God of love. Now, there's the Bible is very clear that another reason that there's bad things is because what's going on there between good and evil is an actual war. Let's go to Exodus chapter 15, please. In Exodus chapter 15, the Bible tells us very clearly, and this is one that I've looked at with Bill Schlegel in the way it's worded. But Exodus chapter 15:3 says, Yahweh is a man of war. You might want to make it as a person of war, but man is masculine. Yahweh is a man of war. Yahweh is his name. Wait a minute. If everything that happens is God's will, and if God's totally in control, who's he fighting? if the reason it says that Yahweh's a man of war is because he has an enemy, and then he's fighting with that enemy. And then I have a list of verses where God's fighting with the enemy, but I don't need to read all these verses. You guys get this. Yahweh's at war with people, and he has enemies, and he says so and makes it very clear. Now, that brings up another point. Let's go to Romans 8:28. This is one that most of you probably have heard me teach on at one time or another, but it's a super important verse to get right. And unfortunately, it's one of the really important verses that, because of the traditional understanding of God and him being in control and the nature of things, that Romans 8:28 gets mistranslated. Or I should say this, it's not technically mistranslated. Romans 8:28 the Greek can be translated two different ways. One is your standard King James Version, New American Standard, ESV type of translation, which is all things work together for good for those who love God and who are called according to his purpose. All things work together for good for those who love God. That is one way to translate the verse. It's problematic. Why is it problematic? Because all you have to do is live for a while and realize there are things that happen in your life that are genuinely bad. They're genuinely evil. I just recently spoke with a man who was doing the funeral for a young man who's got a young wife and a 1-year-old baby, and he was killed in a car wreck when a car coming the other way crossed the median and hit his car. Now, that is not the best for his wife or his kid or his family. It just simply isn't. And to sit around and try to manufacture how a young man with a young family being killed by a driver who crossed the median is some good thing, it's just, it flies in the face of what we're supposed to do when we read the Bible and the way we're supposed to think about God and the goodness of God. The other way to translate Romans 8:28, and I will tip my hat here to the NIV because I didn't really see this in the Greek text until it was in the NIV, that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. And that's exactly kind of what that song we started out with, your love surrounds me, you are my anchor you are my anchor when my sails are torn. When our sails are torn and things are bad, one thing we can say is that God is working to do the best he can for us. Sometimes it's very successful. Sometimes it's sort of successful. Sometimes it doesn't seem very successful. But what we can guarantee is that in our tough situation, God is working for our good. I don't have to do any kind of weird mental gymnastics to figure out why this is good. I was in seminary at Reformed Theological Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, when a woman who had been part of the congregation, single mom, she had a young daughter. The young daughter was standing out on the street waiting for the school bus. A lady who'd been drinking all night and was drunk as a skunk swerved over and killed her child. And it was so egregious, and then drove off. And when the police, because there was a car behind her that caught it and caught the license plate, when the police got to her house, she had part of the child's coat in her grill of her car. I mean, it was just really, really sad. And then church leaders in this, Presbyterian seminary, and they went to the woman's house to tell her how, God, we don't know how yet, but this is a good thing. And the lady told him to get out of her house, and she quit the church. And I half don't blame her. I mean, I really don't. Your only child is killed by a drunk driver, and she's just a young girl, and you're going to tell me that that somehow is a good thing. It's not. You know, if the woman could make it through and get her life straightened out and rid herself of enough of those memories that she could be functional in life, you know, it may mean that she got stronger in some way, but that still doesn't make it a good thing. But I will tell you this, in every situation, God is working for the good of those who love him. But you see, here we are in our nation again. We should have a law. If you get drunk, you know it. If you get drunk and drive, you know it. If you get drunk and drive and kill somebody, you should be executed. And according to Ecclesiastes, you should be executed relatively quickly. And if somebody say, oh my gosh, we'd be killing thousands of people. No, we wouldn't. You put a dozen or so people to death, and I'll tell you what'll happen to drunk driving. It'll come to an end. That's what it'll do. But see, we don't. Anyway, I got to get off my high horse. I can get really emotional about some of this stuff. Another reason that people are that things are bad in life is that, you know, there are evil people. There just are. And we've got to be willing to recognize that. And it's amazing to me how many people are unwilling to look at another person and say, you are evil. But if we look at the Bible's not afraid of that. The Bible calls people like Ahab and others, it calls them evil. And they are, you know. What's the saying in Christianity? God loves the sinner but hates the sin. That's true. But the sinner is God does love the sinner, but the sinner is still a sinner. And we need to be, if we're going to have a safe society, we've got to deal harshly with sinners. James Jordan has a great book on that. It's a commentary on Exodus called The Law and the Covenants. So it's great stuff. Another thing, and I'm going to tighten this up here. Another thing I think that would help a lot is prayer. Even you know, most Christians simply don't pray enough. And to some degree, I'm going to lay this at the feet of the churches because, and you guys know what it's like to go to church services and the pastor or maybe a pastor, choir leader, or somebody prays from the front. But the average churchgoer in the congregation is never trained to pray. The only way you're ever trained to pray is if you actually pray. It's one of the things I love about our STF Zoom meetings is we open the floor for prayer. But people have to be trained to pray. They don't know how to do it. And so that's something where the churches really need to step up. But then we do have to pray and pray a lot. And I'm going to close with wisdom. There is so much emphasis on faith in the Christian church that willingly or unwillingly, there's a de-emphasis on wisdom. And yet the Bible in Proverbs chapter 4 says, wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. And it's wisdom that, you know, there's, I started to make a list of all the unwise things you could do that would make life safer and more fun. And it was like, okay, I quit. It's just thousands of unwise things that you can do to make life unsafe or to make life more hard for yourself or others or whatever. So I think if the churches and we Christians would step up our understanding of wisdom and talk about it more, that would be helpful. So here's some of the things. Now, again, there are still a lot of unexplained things. I'm not going to say that there's not unexplained things about individual evil occurrences on earth. You know, obviously there's things we don't understand, but there's a lot of reasons for the evil and wickedness we see on earth that are preventable. We can't prevent what the devil does, but we can prevent the people that the devil works through. And we could become more wise ourselves, and we could become more reliant on prayers as a Christian body. So thank you for your attention this morning. It's been fun to put this teaching together. And I trust it's been a blessing for you to listen to. So Rob or Sue, I'm going to hand this back to you, and God bless you all. And may we all do better in life.